All right. Hey, everybody. Oh, my goodness. Yes, I am back. Oki says, new book, been waiting for it. I may or may not make it. I'm about to go apply for a second job. Oh, my goodness. Look at you. Just, that's awesome. So I have, what is this? Episode 7, no. Why I downloaded this. Audible.com from, and we gotta go and we gotta send it to more. I may just have to read it. I have the audiobook to listen to Jordan Peterson read it himself, but I didn't do enough prep work to have it set up for tonight, apparently. But I can try, see if it'll work on my phone. All right, come on, phone, hush with the stuff and the things. There's my magic button. All right, silent mode on. Files. Where's my files? How is everybody doing tonight, by the way? It's been a long time. Oh, this is just episode 7? Oh my goodness. I don't know if I got all of it. So anyway. Yes, it's good to see you too. So Shaman is here. Yay! And yeah. I have been super busy little Pam. And I have been doing way too much stuff and exhausting myself in the process. And yeah, it's just, oh my gosh. Okay. Anyway, I have the hardbound. I knew something technological would go nuts. So I have the hardbound. And we have Sexy Rexy to thank for this. So yeah, it's been so much. And so I am glad to be with Pam Pam. Glad to be with the Pam Pam. And I guess people are just not coming to YouTube as regularly as they used to. Is it because the mask mandates have been lifted and everything's, been kind of shuffled back to normal? I cannot see. I need new contacts because I cannot see for the life of me. All right. What is awesome to see? So I would love to know what is awesome to see, but yeah, so I don't know if it's because school is starting or because, stuff is just weird right now. You've got the stupid variants that are out that, they're like, oh, they're more transmissible, they're more virulent. No, I don't care about that. I don't care if I can catch it easier. I want to know if it's more severe symptom-wise or if it's more likely to land me into but I think it's a whole bunch of scare tactics again. They're trying to keep the government money flowing. I mean, that's not to say that it's not serious and there aren't people in the hospital right now and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't care. I just don't want to go through another set of lies of, 2 weeks to flatten the curve and then have it be another year in lockdown. I mean, we can't survive that. Nobody can survive that. It's ridiculous. Kevin says, I have been busy every other Saturday, but I've been checking every week for book club. Oh, bless your heart. Bless your heart. So, and the awesome thing was the hard copy. Oh, yes, yes. Hard copy is a beautiful thing. Analog, we all love our analog. Us old fogies. Um, but yeah, no, I had actually purchased, and I just don't know how to get the Audible book because I'm a troglodyte now. But anyway, all right, let's get to it. Now, I want to read you guys the foreword. I read the foreword, and it's hella interesting because it gives the backstory on what the hell happened to Jordan Peterson. So, a note from the author in the time of the pandemic. It is a perplexing task to produce a nonfiction book during a global crisis brought about by the spread of COVID-19. It seems absurd, in some sense, even to think about anything else but that illness during this trying time. Nonetheless, binding all the thoughts contained in any current work to the existence of the pandemic, which too shall pass, seems like an error, as the normal problems of life will return at some point, and thankfully, to the forefront. That means that an author of the present day is inevitably going to make one mistake, concentrating too much on the pandemic, which has an uncertain lifespan, and producing a book that is instantly dated in consequence, or another, ignoring the pandemic, which is very much like failing to attend to the proverbial elephant under the rug. After considering this, as well as discussing the issues with my publishers, I decided to write Beyond Order 12 More Rules for Life in accordance to the plan laid out for it several years ago, and to concentrate on addressing issues not specific to the current time, thus to risk the second error rather than the first. I suppose it may also be the case that those who have chosen to read this book or listen to the audio version might be relieved to turn their attention to something other than the coronavirus and the devastation it has wrought. So, all right. So, Overture. This is the backstory. On the 5th of February 2020, I awoke in an intensive care ward in, of all places, Moscow. I had 6-inch tethers attaching me to the sides of the bed because, in my unconscious state, I had been agitated enough to try and remove the catheters from my arm and leave the ICU. I was confused and frustrated, not knowing where I was, surrounded by people speaking a foreign language, and in the absence of my daughter Michaela and her husband Andre, who were restricted to short visiting hours and did not have permission to be there with me at my moment of awakening, I was angry too about being there and lunged at my daughter when she did visit several hours later. I felt betrayed, although that was the furthest from the truth. People had been attending to my various needs with great diligence, and in the wake of the tremendous logistic challenges that come about from seeking medical care in a truly foreign country, I do not have any memory of anything that happened to me during the most recent weeks preceding that, and very little between that moment and my having entered a hospital in Toronto in mid-December. So we entered the hospital right when the virus started to spread. One of the few things I could recall looking back in the earliest days of the year was the time I had spent writing this book. I wrote much and edited almost all of Beyond Order during a time when my family was plagued by sequential and overlapping bouts of seriously impaired health, much of which was the subject of public discussion, and for that reason requires some detailed explanation. First, in January 2019, Michaela had to seek out a surgeon to replace much of her artificial ankle, implanted about a decade earlier, as the initial installation was never perfect, causing her serious pain and trouble with movement as a consequence, and then came near to failing. I spent a week with her at the hospital in Zurich, Switzerland, for a week of that procedure and her initial recovery. At the beginning of March, my wife Tammy underwent a routine surgery in Toronto for a common and eminently treatable kidney cancer. A month and a half after that surgery, which involved the removal of 1/3 of the organ in question, we learned that she was actually suffering from an extremely rare malignancy, which had a 1-year fatality rate of close to 100%. 2 weeks later, the surgeons involved in her care removed the remaining 2/3 of her afflicted kidney, along with a substantial portion of the related abdominal lymphatic system. The surgery appeared to bring the progression of the cancer to a halt, but produced leakage of a fluid up to 4 liters or 1 gallon a day from her now damaged lymphatic system, a condition known as Chulus ascites. I am not pronouncing that right. Which rivaled the original condition in danger. We journeyed to see a medical team in Philadelphia where within 96 hours of the initial injection of a poppy seed oil dye, whose practical purpose was to enhance the enhancement of images derived from CAT or MRI scans, the complete cessation of Tammy's fluid loss was achieved. The breakthrough occurred on the very day of our 30th wedding anniversary. She recovered rapidly and, to all appearances, completely, a testament to the luck without which none of us can live, and to her own admirable strength and resistance. Unfortunately, while these events unfolded, my health fell apart. You think? I had begun to take an anti-anxiety agent at the beginning of 2017 after suffering from what appeared to be an autoimmune reaction to something I had consumed during the Christmas holiday period of 2016. The illness that had destroyed Michaela's ankle, necessitating its replacement, as well as her hip, was also immune-related, and my wife had some arthritic symptoms that were similar to hers. I'm mentioning this to shed some light on why the assumption of an immune response program sprang into mind and made certain sense. The food reaction made me acutely and continually anxious, as well as freezing cold, no matter what clothes I was wearing or how many blankets I layered upon myself. We now understand how he was able to walk around under those hot lights in 3-piece suits. It was all because he was freezing cold at the time. So, where am I? Further, it lowered my blood pressure so dramatically that whenever I tried to stand, I would gray out and be forced to crouch a half a dozen more times before trying again. I also experienced insomnia that appeared near total. My family physician prescribed a benzodiazepine as well as a drug for sleep. I took the latter a mere handful of times before ceasing its use entirely. The terrible symptoms I was experiencing, including the insomnia, were almost immediately and entirely eradicated by the benzodiazepine treatment, making the sleep agent unnecessary. I continued the benzodiazepines for almost exactly 3 years because my life did seem unnaturally stressful during that time, the period when my life changed from the quiet existence of a university professor and clinician to the tumultuous reality of public figure. And I believe that this drug was, as is often claimed of benzodiazepines, a relatively harmless substance. Phew. Things changed, however, in March of 2019, on the onset of my wife's medical battle. My anxiety spiked noticeably after Michaela's aforementioned hospitalization, surgery, and recovery. In consequence, I asked my family physician to increase my dose of benzodiazepine so that I would not be preoccupied nor preoccupy others with my anxiety. Unfortunately, I experienced a marked increase in negative emotion following the adjustment, which is often true of, I've got an ice pack back here keeping me cool, often true of these medications. You can find a sweet spot, but more isn't necessarily better. Sometimes less is. And it's counterintuitive. So, you think you're having more problems, you need more help. No, 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 no. And with a lot of the head meds, as I like to call them, you can experience side effects that are just absolutely devastating. And we've got some new stuff, new people here. Minister Brennan, praying for Pam. Hope you are doing well. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I do need the prayers right now. I am under some attacks, both in the real world and the spiritual world, that have been just unbelievable. But the angels seem to be striking back now, which is awesome. But it was a rough ride there for a while. So I asked to have the dosage raised yet again. Bad idea. This time we were attempting to deal with the second of Tammy's surgeries and its complication, and I attributed my even more severe anxiety to that problem, but my anxiety increased even further. I attributed all of this not to a paradoxical reaction to the medication, which it was later diagnosed as. Yeah. But to the recurrence of the tendency towards depression that had plagued me for years. I had taken some serotonin reuptake inhibitors such as Celexa for nearly 2 decades, greatly benefiting from their administration before stopping in early 2016 because of a dramatic dietary change that seemed to render them unnecessary. Changing medications like this, people don't realize you need to, even though the medications may be short acting, the way our body adjusts to these things, a lot of times you really want to take 6 months to see what the adjustment is before our bodies don't work like a light switch. And these things get saturated into our cells, especially things like serotonin reuptake inhibitors, because serotonin works throughout the body. It works on your blood pressure. It works on vasodilation and constriction. It works on wound healing. These things doctors hardly know. I mean, they're not taught this stuff. The way that we teach pharmacology, it only gets taught to the new doctors. There's only so much time you could spend in med school on these things. So a lot of times what you have is you have patient experts who find out this stuff, like me. And I found this from studying migraines, because migraines is a serotonin problem and also a dopamine problem, which all connects into psychological problems. And with migraines, you have mood swings and all sorts of other things, panic attacks, horrible depressions. I mean, the way the body works is really strange. And I know from my endocrine issues that, if I have to adjust my thyroid medication, it will take 6 months from the day that I start taking the new dosage for that to saturate throughout my cells for my body to then start feeling the effects. So to quit these drugs and say, oh, it's out of your system in 4 hours. No, 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 no. It may be out of your blood in 4 hours, but it is not out of the cells of your body in 4 hours. And that sort of change, that readjustment, can take 6 months. So I can understand why Jordan ended up in so much trouble. It's because he was dealing with systems that are not, I was talking to my mom today about this, and we were talking about how, the doctors you want to deal with are the doctors that don't have things that are very formulaic. If you deal with internal medicine, it's like, oh, you take an antibiotic, 7-day course, 14-day course, you're better. Hey, Lawrence is here. Hey, Lawrence. He says, hi, everyone. I hope the air is clearer up there, and I hope the fires are dying down. I hope you're getting some rain these days. That would be nice. But I hear that my mom is still getting the heat, so I bet you're still getting the heat too, which is just, oof. They've started collecting the trash at 5:30 in the morning in her neighborhood, just so the trash men don't have to deal with the heat. Because nobody out there is used to, temperatures over 85 in the summer. Maybe an occasional 90 every once in a while, but that lasts for 3 days and is gone. This high record heat is not something that they are used to. But anyway, my mother and I were talking today about if you have a doctor that deals with more weird things, like, say, endocrinology, which deals with the thyroid and these things that take months and have all these strange symptoms that are all over the place and things like that, you get a doctor that has to think outside of the box, and they're much more creative, and they have to be more creative. And therefore, a lot of times you'll get a better diagnosis because they're not thinking in terms of formulas. And the same thing goes for rheumatology. I mean, rheumatology isn't just you have to be creative. Rheumatology, you have to understand voodoo. It gets that bizarre because we don't understand the immune system at all. And since he's having immune issues that are sparking these problems, he really should have been in rheumatology and should not have just been thinking of symptom control with psych. So it makes total sense that he ended up in a lot of trouble. I'm surprised he didn't end up in more, actually. So, and this is funny. This next part, it's funny to me. It's not funny to him, but it's funny to me. In any case, I ceased using the benzodiazepines entirely in May of that year, trying 2 doses of ketamine within a week, as suggested by my psychiatrist with whom I consulted. Ketamine is a non-standard anesthetic / psychedelic, sometimes has overwhelming and sudden positive effects on depression. It produced nothing for me but 2 90-minute trips to hell. I felt to my bones as if I had everything to feel guilty and ashamed about, with nothing gained by my positive experiences. Now, I have the exact opposite. Every time I do a ketamine treatment, it's like an elevator ride to heaven, where I am, conversing with, I'm talking to God, basically. Not that I think that in a literal sense, but, my spirit is just wholly elevated, and everything is positive and everything is wonderful. And so, it's funny that the same drug can have completely different experiences in 2 different people. For me, it's everything is good, everything is relaxed, everything is fun, and I'm safe, and people are taking care of me, and all of that. That's my experience with ketamine, and his is exactly the opposite. So it makes me wonder, what is it about our biochemistry that he had this, what they typically call the K-hole. You fall into this hole that is just a bad place. But for me, no, it's wonderful. And the effects last. I was having a hard time with my situation. I went in for my ketamine treatment, and then boom, that day I was handling things no problem. I knew exactly how to handle things the next day. It lasted for, a good 2 weeks where I was just like, this is no problem. This can be managed. We're going to be on top of this. Everything's good. And so, yeah, I can see bodies are weird. A few days after the second ketamine experience, I began to suffer the effects of acute benzodiazepine withdrawal, which were truly intolerable. Anxiety far beyond what I had ever experienced, an uncontrollable restlessness and need to move. Now, I've suffered that from a potassium reuptake inhibitor. That restlessness. I was just rolling around on the couch. I could not hold still. So I know what that feels like. That's not fun. Formerly known as akathisia, overwhelming thoughts of self-destruction and the complete absence of any happiness whatsoever. A family friend, a physician, enlightened me as to the dangers of sudden benzodiazepine withdrawal. I therefore started to take the benzodiazepine once again, but at a smaller dose that I had climbed to previously. Yes, you want to taper off this stuff slow and low. These things are dangerous. Many, but not all of my symptoms were abated. To deal with those that remained, I also began to take an antidepressant that had been of great use to me in the past. That doesn't mean it's going to be good use now, but, it's a reasonable bet. All it did, however, was make me exhausted enough to require an additional 4 or more hours of sleep a day, which was not helpful in the midst of Tammy's serious health issues, as well as an increase in my appetite 2- or 3-fold. Yeah. Just because it worked for you a few years ago does not mean your body is going to react to it the same way the next time around. I've had this happen in both good ways and bad ways. So makes total sense. After about 3 months of terrible anxiety, uncontrollable hypersomnia, viciously torturous akathisia, and excessive appetite, I traveled to an American clinic that claimed to specialize in rapid benzodiazepine withdrawal. Holy shit. Despite the good intentions of many of its psychiatrists, the clinic managed only a slow cessation or tapering of my benzodiazepine dosage. The negative effects of which I was already experiencing and were not and could not be controlled to any significant degree whatsoever by the inpatient treatment offered. Not surprising in the least. I resided at that clinic nonetheless from mid-August, a mere few days after Tammy had recovered from her post-surgical complications, to late November, when I returned home to Toronto, much the worse for wear. By this time, the akathisia, the disorder of uncontrollable movement alluded to earlier, had increased to the point where I could not sit or rest in any position for any length of time whatsoever without severe distress. Now, this was about the time online that a lot of people had found out. They did the published papers about him going in for medically assisted treatment for withdrawal, and everybody assumed that he had an addiction. And it's like, no. Some of these drugs, and they know benzodiazepines are one of them now. There are now 3 drugs that the withdrawal can actually kill you. One is barbiturates, the other one is alcohol, and now benzodiazepines have been added to the list. If you try and come off benzodiazepines too quickly, not only will you have horrible symptoms like this, but it can kill you. So, yeah, he got a rash of just backlash that he didn't deserve at all. Let's see. In December, I checked into a local hospital, and it was at that point that my awareness of events prior to my awakening in Moscow ends. As I later learned, Michaela and Andre removed me from that Toronto hospital in early January 2020, believing that the treatment I received there was doing more harm than good, an opinion I concurred with entirely once I learned of it. The situation I found myself in upon retaining consciousness in Russia was complicated by the fact that I had also developed double pneumonia in Canada, although that was neither discovered nor treated until I was in the Moscow ICU. So much for Western medicine. However, I was there primarily so that the clinic could facilitate my withdrawal from benzodiazepines using a procedure either unknown or regarded as too dangerous in North America, or regarded as too good in North America. The next book we may read after this is the one on the Sacklers, because that will show you the level of corruption that exists in the U.S. medical system and Western medical systems as a whole today. It's alarming. So, since I had not been able to tolerate any decrease in dosage whatsoever, apart from the initial reduction months before, the clinic placed me into a medically induced coma so that I might remain unconscious during the very worst withdrawal symptoms. That regimen started January 5th and lasted 9 days, during which I was also placed in a machine so that my breathing was mechanically regulated. He didn't have COVID, but he was one of the first people who was on a ventilator. On January 14th, I was taken off the anesthetic and the intubation. I woke up for a few hours and indicated during this time to Michaela that I was no longer suffering from akathisia, although I remember nothing of this. On January 23rd, I was moved to another ICU specializing in neurological rehabilitation. I can recall waking up on the 26th for a short period until my more complete return to consciousness, as previously related, on the 5th of February, 10 days, during which I passed through a period of delirium of vivid intensity. Once that cleared, I moved to a more home-like rehabilitation center in the outer suburbs of Moscow. While there, I had to relearn how to walk up and down stairs, button my clothes, lie down in a bed on my own, and place my hands in the proper position on a computer keyboard and type. I did not seem to be able to see properly, or more accurately, see how to use my limbs to interact with what I perceived. A few weeks later, after the problems in perception and coordination had essentially abated, Michaela, Audrey, their child, and I relocated to Florida in what we hoped would be some peaceful time of recuperation in the sun, very much welcome after the cold grayness of midwinter Moscow. This was immediately before the worldwide concern erupted over the COVID-19 pandemic. In Florida, I attempted to wean off the medication prescribed by the Moscow clinic, although I was still experiencing numbness in my left hand and foot, trembling of those two extremities, as well as the muscles in my forehead, seizure activity, and crippling anxiety. All of these symptoms increased quite markedly as my intake of medication decreased, reaching the point about 2 months later where I returned to the dosages initially prescribed in Russia. This was a material defeat, as the process of lessening their use had been fueled by an optimism that was consequently shattered, as well as returning me to a state of medication usage that I had paid a heavy price for trying to eliminate. I had family members and friends stay with me during this time, thankfully, and their company helped me stay motivated to continue while the symptoms I was experiencing grew unbearable, particularly in the morning. Yes, the mornings are the worst. They're always the worst. Mornings are bad. And almost every pain patient I know, or chronic illness patient I know, goes, mornings are bad. There's about an hour period after which you wake up where your body really hasn't quite adjusted to being awake yet, and you don't know how you will feel after that hour is over. You could be fine and just continue to carry on with your morning, or you can suddenly crash and everything comes to a complete halt. So, Lawrence says, I remember when I had to taper off the Xanax and Ambien a few years back. It was hard. Yeah, I bet it was. Okie Kevin says, I have a long and rage-inducing history with the medical system corruption, specifically one doctor. You're lucky it's only one. Ooh, but I know exactly. I have medical PTSD from a doctor where I had left my home in Seattle to go visit a friend of mine in Kitsap. And I realized that I was in such a state of panic and anxiety that I couldn't go back home, even though I left the back door of my apartment completely wide open. Completely open. And I was so anxiety stricken that I didn't care if I came home to find all of my stuff gone. I didn't care that if I came home to find somebody living there. I didn't care. I couldn't go back home just as long as a friend of mine went over and fed my cats. And the reason why we couldn't shut the door is one of the cats was outside and not in the apartment. And he was too shy to come back when my friend was there, dropping off the cat food. And it was just that I could not go back to the city that I lived in. I could not go back to my own apartment because it was too close to where the trauma happened. And then I went through worse trauma on Kitsap, and it was a bloody nightmare. So yeah. Doctors, gotta breathe. Shaman says, I've heard you talk about it, Lawrence. Thanks for sharing. Seems like that's really out there. It absolutely is. And he wasn't the only bad doctor, but he was the worst. And it got to the point where I couldn't go to any other doctor. He was a surgeon, so I was never going to see him again, but that didn't matter. I couldn't go to my regular doctors because they were doctors, and I couldn't get refills for my medication. And if I didn't get refills for my medication, I was going to die. And so I did the only thing that I knew how to do, and that is I called the National Crisis Hotline. And I said, look, I'm not suicidal. Here's my problem. I don't know what to do. I need help. And that's when I was diagnosed with medical PTSD. And I was given benzodiazepines, except for me, I am so sensitive to them that I can't even take 1 milligram. I can't even take half a milligram. I have to take 1/4 of a milligram of benzodiazepines. Otherwise, I just fall asleep. I'm out. I'm so sensitive to them that you just give me a tiny amount, and that allowed me to walk back into the doctor's office. Otherwise, I would just drive there, sit in my car, panic until the appointment had passed, and then I'd drive back home. And I did that several times. And I was like, I can't keep going through doctors like this. I could make the appointment. I just couldn't get out of my car in the parking lot. So Free, you are being obnoxious. You need to get off my lap because you are too warm. I didn't. This dog has been obstinate today. Get down. Thank you. Too warm. She's like a heating, a water bottle, hot water bottle on my lap. And I got an ice pack on my back to try and stay cool enough. It's not good. So anyway, let's get back to Jordan's trials and tribulations. Let's see. So he had to go back up on the medication, which, broke his heart, broke his spirit, understandably. and bad symptoms in the morning, which is a well-known thing. By the end of May, 3 months after leaving Russia, it had become obvious that I was worsening instead of improving. Relying on the people I loved who reciprocated that emotion was both untenable and unfair. Michaela and Andre had been in touch with a Serbian clinic that practiced a novel approach to the problem of benzodiazepine withdrawal, and they made arrangements to move me there only 2 days after that country had reopened from the pandemic closure. I am not going to make a claim that the events that befell my wife, me, and those who were closely involved in her care added up in the final analysis to some greater good. What happened to her was truly awful. She experienced a severe and near fatal crisis of health every 2 or 3 days for more than half a year, and then had to cope with my illness and absence. I was plagued, for my part, with the likely loss of someone who I had befriended for 50 years and been married to for 30, the observation of the terrible consequence of that on her other family members, including our children, and the dire and dreadful consequence of a substance dependence I had unwittingly stumbled into. Most people unwittingly stumble into a substance dependence. That's just the way it is. It's not like you have little alarm bells that go off like your iPhone, low battery. No, we don't get that. We don't come with instruction manuals. So I am not going to cheapen any of that by claiming that we became better people for living through it. Good. So glad he wrote this. However, I can say that passing so near to death motivated my wife to attend to some issues regarding her own spiritual and creative development more immediately and assiduously than she might otherwise have, and me to write or persevere while editing only those words in this book that retain their significance, even under conditions characterized by extreme suffering. Yep. It is certainly thanks to family and friends who are named specifically in the coda of this book that we are all still alive. But it is also true that the meaningful immersion in what I was writing, which continued during the entire time I have related, excepting my unconscious month in Russia, provided me with both a reason to live and means of testing the viability of thoughts with which I wrestled. This is going to be a good book. I do not believe I have ever claimed in my previous book, or indeed this one, that it would be necessarily sufficient to live by the rules I have presented. I think what I hope I claimed was this: when you are visited by chaos and swallowed up, when nature curses you or someone you love with illness, when tyranny rends asunder something of value that you have built, it is salutary to know the rest of the story. All of that misfortune is only the bitter half of the tale of existence, without taking note of the heroic element of the redemption or the nobility of the human spirit requiring a certain responsibility to shoulder. We ignore that addition to the story at our peril, because life is so difficult that losing sight of the heroic part of existence could cost us everything. We do not want that to happen. We need instead to take heart and to take spirit and to look at things carefully and properly and to live the way that we could live. You have sources of strength on which you can draw, and even though they may not work well, they may be enough. That was one of my favorite sayings that I got when wrestling with my own terrible health conditions. Perfection is the enemy of good enough. And sometimes good enough is all you need. You have what you can learn if you can accept your error. You have medications and hospitals, as well as physicians and nurses who genuinely and bravely care to lift you up and help you through every day, if that's what you have. And then you have your own character and courage. And if those have been beat to a bloody pulp and you are ready to throw in the towel, you have the character and courage of those for whom you care and who care for you. And maybe, just maybe, with all of that, you can get through. I can tell you what has saved me so far. The love that I have for my family, the love they have for me, the encouragement that they have delivered, along with my friends, the fact that I still had meaningful work I could struggle through while in the abyss. Yes, yes. I just made a TikTok on this earlier today. And that's, man's search for meaning. It goes back to the old Nietzsche quote, he who has the correct why can overcome any how. And there is so much truth to that. If you've got a purpose, you will struggle through to get to that purpose, but it's got to be a strong enough purpose. If it's not strong enough, you'll just throw up your hands and say, who cares? But yeah, it's whew. So long story short, my family had a great insurance, and this doctor got one of my family members addicted to opioids to keep charging the insurance. Oh God. That he had the gall to recommend his wife's physical therapy because our insurance would cover it. Yes, there are a lot of things going on right now like that, not just with opiates, but what they call drill mills, where if you have good insurance, they'll send you for injection after injection after injection, which I went through when I had TRICARE. They just wanted to inject stuff into the back of my head that wasn't working, but the process was, such an ordeal that they could charge a lot of money for it. And it's like, you bastards, So yeah, having good insurance can be as much of a curse as it is a benefit if you run into somebody corrupt out there like that. And drill mills are even worse because they're doing risky surgeries where they're implanting things into people's spinal columns, risking paralyzation, risking death, risking all sorts of other things just for that. It's unconscionable to me. I don't understand it. I had to force myself to sit down at the computer. I had to force myself to concentrate and to breathe and to keep from saying and meaning to hell with it during the endless months that I was possessed by dread and terror. And I was barely able to do it. More than half the time, I believed that I was going to die in one of the many hospitals in which I resided. And I believed that if I had fallen prey to resentment, for example, I would have perished once and for all, and I am fortunate to have avoided such a fate. It is not possible, even though it may not always deliver us from the terrible situation that we find ourselves in, that we would be all more able to deal with uncertainty, the horrors of nature, the tyrannies of culture, and the malevolence of ourselves and others, if we were better and more courageous people. Oh, is it not possible? Sorry. If we were more courageous people. Well, yeah, but courage can also make you do stupid things. If we strive towards higher values, if we were more truthful, wouldn't the beneficial elements of experience be more likely to manifest themselves around us? Yes, and that's why I think the loss of Christian culture, not to say all the tropes of Christianity, but the Christian culture that had people say, no, I need to be honorable, I need to be truthful, I need to, stick to my values, that kind of thing. That had a better world about it. Not always, that there was certainly some bad things with it, but I think there was a more honest time at one point where corruption like this was not as rampant. Um, so, wouldn't the beneficial elements of experience be more likely to manifest themselves around us? Is it not possible, if your goals were noble enough, your courage adequate, your aim at the truth unerring, and that the good thereby produced well would not justify the horror? It's not exactly right, but it still comes close. Such attitudes and actions might at least provide us with meaning sufficient to stop our encounter with that terror and horror from corrupting us. There you go. And ruining the surrounding world into something all too closely resembling hell. Yes. Why beyond order? It's simple in some regard. Order is explored territory. We are in order when the actions we deem appropriate produce the results we aim at. We regard such outcomes positively, indicating, as they do, first, that we have moved closer to what we desire, and second, that our theory about how the world works remains acceptably accurate. Nonetheless, all states of order, no matter how secure and comfortable, have their flaws. Our knowledge of how to act in the world remains eternally incomplete, partially because of our profound ignorance to the vast unknown, and partly because of our willful blindness, and partly because of the way the world continues in its entropic manner to transform itself unexpectedly. Furthermore, the order that we strive to impose in the world can rigidify, and as a consequence of ill-advised attempts to eradicate from consideration all that is unknown. When attempts go too far, totalitarianism threatens, driven by the desire to exercise full control where such control is not possible, even in principle. This means risking a dangerous restriction of all the psychological and social changes necessary to maintain adaptation to the ever-changing world. And so we find ourselves inescapably faced with the need to move beyond order and into its opposite, chaos. If order is where what we want makes itself known when we act in accordance with our hard-won wisdom, chaos is where what we do not expect to have remained blind to leaps forward from the potential that surrounds us. The fact that something has occurred many times in the past is no guarantee that it will continue to occur in the same manner. There exists eternally a domain beyond what we know and can predict. Chaos is anomaly, novelty, unpredictability, transformation, disruption, and all too often dissent, as what we have come to take for granted reveals itself as unreliable. Sometimes it manifests itself gently, revealing its mysteries in experience that makes us curious, compelled, and interested. This is particularly likely, although not inevitable, when we approach what we do not understand voluntarily with careful preparation and discipline. Other times, the unexpected makes itself known terribly, suddenly, accidentally, so we are undone and fall apart and can only put ourselves back together with great difficulty, if at all. I think we're at the halfway mark. We are at the halfway mark. So let me put on a little Akira the Dawn and see what we have here. Yes. Smoke them if you got them, folks.
Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you, that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Wherefore, if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you? O ye of little faith. 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 Shall he not much more clothe you? Therefore, take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? Those are famous lines. That's sort of Christ the hippie, right? It's like, hey, let it all hang out, do your thing, and everything will come to you. But that's seriously not the proper interpretation, because there's a kicker with this. And the kicker is this: for your heavenly Father knows you have need of all these things. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. O ye of little faith. 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 Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. That's a lot different than the hippie thing. That's a lot different than the hippie thing, right? That's a lot different than the hippie thing. That's a lot different than the hippie thing, right? That's a lot different than the hippie thing. That's a lot different than the hippie thing, right? That's a lot different than the hippie thing. That's a lot different than the hippie thing, right? There's a very, very, very interesting idea here. It's certainly one of the most profound ideas that I've ever encountered. If you configure your life so that what you are genuinely doing is aiming at the highest possible good, then the things that you need to survive and to thrive on a day-to-day basis will deliver themselves to you. If you dare do the most difficult thing that you can conceptualize, your life will work out better than it will if you do anything else. Well, how are you going to find out if that's true? There's no way you're going to find out whether or not that's true unless you do it. You have to be all in this game. All in this game. All in this game. All in this game. O ye of little faith. O ye of little faith. O ye of little faith. O ye of little faith.
Wow. I timed that perfectly. I had a whole bunch of things to do. I had to switch which side the flower was on because my head's hurting on one side, and I had to get more ice packs, and I had to set up the fan because it's too hot in here. But one thing I didn't do. Oh, take in some tobacco. All right. So, let's see. All right. So neither the state of order nor the state of chaos is preferable intrinsically to the other. That is the wrong way to look at it. Nevertheless, in my previous book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote for Chaos, I focused on how the consequences of too much chaos might be remedied. We responded to sudden and unpredictable change by preparing psychologically and physiologically for the worst. And it became only God Himself knows what His worst might be. We must, in our ignorance, prepare for all eventualities, if we can even be creative enough to think of all of them. And the problem with that continual preparation is that in excess, it exhausts us. Yeah. But that does not imply in any manner that chaos should be eliminated, an impossibility in any case. Although what is unknown needs to be managed carefully, as my previous book repeatedly stressed. Whatever is not touched by the new stagnates, and it is certainly the case that a life without curiosity, that instinct pushing us into the unknown, would be a much diminished form of existence. What is new is also what is exciting, compelling, provocative, and assume that the rate at which it is introduced does not intolerably undermine and destabilize our state of being. Like 12 Rules for Life, the current volume provides an explication of rules drawn from a longer list of 42, originally published and popularized on the Q&A website Quora. Unlike my previous book, Beyond Order explores as its overreaching theme how the dangers of too much security and control might be profitably avoided. Because what we understand is insufficient, as we discover when things we are striving to control nonetheless go wrong around us. We need to keep one foot within order while stretching the other tentatively into the beyond. And so we are driven to explore to find the deepest of meanings in standing on the frontier, secure enough to keep our fear under control, but learning, constantly learning, as we face what we have not yet made peace with or adapted to. It is this instinct of meaning, that something far deeper than mere thought, that orients us properly in life, so that we do not become overwhelmed by what is beyond us, or equally dangerously stultified and stunted by dated, too narrow, or too pridefully paraded systems of values and belief. What I have written about more specifically, Rule 1 describes the relationship between the stable, predictable social structures and the individual psychological health, and makes the case that such structures need to be updated by creative people if they are to retain their vitality. Rule 2 analyzes a centuries-old alchemical image relying on several stories, ancient and modern, to illuminate the nature of development of the integrated human personality. Rule 3 warns of the dangers of avoiding the information vital to the continual rejuvenation of the psyche, signaled by the emergence of negative emotions such as pain, anxiety, and fear. Rule 4 argues that the meaning that sustains people through difficult times is to be found not so much in happiness, which is fleeting, but in the voluntary adoption of mature responsibility for the self and others. Rule 5 uses a single example drawn from my experience as a clinical psychologist to illustrate the personal and societal necessity of attending to the dictates of conscience. Rule 6 describes the dangers of attributing the cause of complex individual and societal problems to single variables such as sex, class, or power. That'll be fun. Rule 7 outlines the crucial relationships between disciplined striving in a single direction and forging of the individual character capable of resilience in the face of adversity. Rule 8 focuses on the vital importance of aesthetic experiences as a guide to what is true, good, and sustaining in the human world of existence. Rule 9 makes the case that past experiences, whose current recall remains laden with pain and fear, can be stripped of their horror by voluntarily, verbally exploration and reconsideration. That's true, but you often need help doing that. Rule 10 notes that the importance of explicit negotiation to maintenance of the goodwill, mutual regard, and heartfelt cooperation without which no true romance can be sustained. Rule 11 opens by describing the world of human experience in a manner that explains what motivates three common but directly dangerous patterns of psychological response, delineates the catastrophic consequences of falling prey to any or all of them, and lays out an alternative route. Rule 12 makes the case that thankfulness in the face of the inevitable tragedies of life should be regarded as a primary manifestation of the admirable moral courage required to continue our difficult march uphill. And he's got a footnote here. It may be of some interest to note that this book and its predecessor, although each stands on its own, were also designed to jointly represent the balance they both strive to describe. It is for this reason that, in the English language versions at least, the first is bound in white and the second in black. They constitute a matched set, like the Taoist yin and yang. I hope that I am somewhat wiser in my explication of this second set of 12 rules than I was 4 years ago when I wrote about the first dozen, not least because of the informative feedback I have received in the course of my efforts to formulate my ideas for audiences around the world in person, on YouTube, and through my podcast and blog. My new YouTube channel can be found and my podcast is at jordanpeterson.com. I hope in consequence that I have managed to clarify some of the issues that were perhaps left less optimally developed in my previous work, as well as presenting much that is original. Finally, I hope that people will find this book as helpful personally as they seem to have found the first set of 12 rules. It has been a source of immense gratification that so many people have reported drawing strength from the thoughts and stories I have had the privilege of bringing forth and sharing. So that is the overture. And that will get us into rule number 1. So I'm going to read through the 12 rules themselves so that we have sort of a roadmap of where we're going. So rule 1 is do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or creative achievement. Rule 2, imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that. Rule 3, do not hide unwanted things in the fog. Rule 4, notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. Yes. Rule 5, do not do what you hate. That's a great rule. Rule 6, abandon ideology. Another great rule. Rule 7, work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens. Rule 8, try to make one room in your house as beautiful as possible. I'm working on that one. Rule 9, If old memories still upset you, write them down carefully and completely. Ooh. Rule 9. If old memories still upset you, find a way to explore them in a detached but mindful manner. That's how I would rewrite that one. Because the one thing that I did that was supremely helpful to me was a form of EMDR that exists, as far as I know, still only on the West Coast. It's a type of trauma recovery, and there's a whole bunch of tools and setup things that you do beforehand. And then you enter the state through EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And it's the old swinging watch. And you can do it with what they call tappers that goes bzz, 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 left, right, left, right. You can also do it with sounds going back and forth in either ear, or a light bar that goes like that. And you can set the speed to where you feel at peace. And you enter that peaceful state first. And what that does is it gives bilateral stimulation to both hemispheres. So they're working in concert. And then after that, what it allows you to do is it allows you to go back into those memories. Well, first you construct a safe space, mental safe space, and 3 forms of yourself: the spiritual self, the nurturing self, and the protective self. And any of those 3 avatars will come to your rescue should anything happen. And then you also have your babysitter for your inner children. And you go back to the old memory, and you can see yourself as you were back then. And you can also remember yourself now without becoming engulfed in those old memories. And so you can watch it from almost a third person point of view and take in more information about it, because you're able to keep your clear-headed current mind instead of just being overwhelmed by this previous state of existence. You can be possessed by your inner children, and those patterns, those neural networks are laid down so thick that they can take over your thought process. And that's exactly what you don't want to happen. That's why you have the bilateral stimulation going, is to keep those things from being dominant. And then what you can do is, after you've gone through the experiences, you've learned the new things, you've had the new insights, looking back as an adult on the old situation, you can then take that child that went through that horrific experience and say, I am you all grown up. You know what that means? That means you got through it. You survived. You made it out in one piece. That was exactly what you were supposed to do. And you don't have to take over anymore. I'm here. I'm an adult. I have more wisdom. You can go off and play. In fact, here's a room that we have for you that is whatever you want it to be. And we have this avatar, the babysitter, that will watch over you. And if ever you're in any trouble or need anything, you can contact it. It will contact me. And you set up these neural networks of avatars in your mind. And if the inner child won't speak to you, you can have your nurturing self, your protective self, or your spiritual self step in and say, what are the nurturing things that you need to hear? What do you need to tell me? What do you need to explain to me? Why are you taking over in my modern life? And it's this wonderful form of EMDR that I've found nowhere else. And it's just chef's kiss, great therapy. So I know that's what he means in this rule, but I don't think he's ever come across that kind of therapy. And that kind of therapy I have seen take people who were unable to even sit in a chair without, being crunched up in a ball with their knees up to their chin, just completely hiding, to standing up straight and greeting strangers, shaking their hands, giving them a hug. I saw this woman transform in a year. And that's why HMOs used to love this form of therapy, because the more you did it, the less you needed it and the longer you could go. So they needed to pay out less in insurance money. That's the one area where HMOs were good, is they were very good at finding efficient processes. And so, yeah, I saw that happen to her, and I was like, how did you do that? And she said, oh, you need to go to Carol Peters in Seattle. And I was like, okay. I beelined myself there, and I did therapy with her for about 5 years, and it changed my life. It changed me. It was fantastic. And so, yeah, that's what he means in this step, but he doesn't have the kind of experience that I have had to be able to say that. But he's on the right track. It's just that sometimes writing them down carefully and completely isn't sufficient. It may be for a mind such as his, but for other people, that may be the wrong approach altogether. But we'll see. We'll see. So, Rule 10, plan your work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship. Rule 11, do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. Those are all great. Rule 12, be grateful in spite of your suffering. Yes, that's huge. Love it. Love it. I'm so looking forward to this. And a different gnome is here. Yay, a different gnome. Sitting with knees to chin. I never sat like that. Not in a chair. Oh, yeah, this was at 12-step meetings that I used to go to. And she would walk in and she would grab a cup of coffee and she would hunch, crouch in the chair with her knees up like that and just hold her cup of coffee right there. I can't do it because my belly's too big right now. I'm too fat. But yeah, she would sit like that. And it was this totally defensive sort of way to sit. She had both of her legs and her arms and everything. She was just curled up in a ball, in a chair. And it was, and then to see her just sitting there peacefully and making eye contact and being able to share and being able to go up to people afterwards and give them a hug, because she used to just beeline out the door when she was done. And it was, and when I found out her history as to how she ended up like that, I was like, oh yeah, that would turn anybody into what you became. That makes total sense. I mean, the horrors of what she had lived through, and to be able to go back in time and repair that kind of traumatic damage was just mind-blowing to me. So yeah, I mean, really, really good stuff. And I wish I knew the name of it. And if anybody knows the name of it or can find out the name of it for me, please tell me, because it's the best stuff in the world. It's the absolute best stuff in the world. And I would like to advertise it to every psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist, everywhere. I mean, it should be mandatory training. It is the new psychology, and it is just so good. And there are different ways of dealing with the trauma. Like if the trauma is too extreme, instead of going back and reviewing it as if you're actually there, you can review it as a picture book or as something on a TV set. Things like that, where you're not even in the same room. You're watching a television program of what went on. And that allows you to detach from it further. And it's just the level of the detachment while remaining conscious, cognizant, and all those other things at the same time. And being able to reprocess that. That's the big thing is the desensitization from it and the reprocessing of it. It's life-changing. Absolutely life-changing. So, yeah, I wish I had been in Seattle long enough to see her for the medical PTSD, but she told me, you're still going through it. And I was still going through medical problems, and things like that. She's like, you don't have enough distance on it to deal with it yet. And now I think I do have enough distance on it to deal with it. And when I tried to do EMDR here in Denver again, it was not the same. And I knew more than the therapists, which is a lousy position to be in when you need therapy. It's like, oh, crap. The student's got to be the teacher. No, that's not how this is supposed to work. So, anyway, I think I'm going to draw it to a close here and start us fresh on chapter 1 next week. Because I'm just, it's been a rough time. I'm still dealing with this weird swelling. I'm still dealing with the hives. And it's hot. This is hot. I want to put my hair back up. Yeah. So, but I'm also very vain, and I'm not as pretty on camera when I have my hair up. So yeah, I think I'm going to shut it down. Let me know if you have any last burning desires or comments or questions or anything like that. And we will get to them. But otherwise, it's great to be back. It's great to be back in the books. I'm glad that Logic Rex told me to do this book. Because just reading the overture alone was huge. So, Shaman says, thanks, Pam. It was a good start to the new book. Yes, I thought so too. Thank you. A different gnome says, well, the flower looks lovely. Thank you. Yeah, it's actually, this clip is really harsh, and I needed the other clip because this is a more gentle clip. And I had stuck these in a box somewhere and forgotten about them. So, but yeah, definitely my head is hurting on that side. So I'm going to shut her down so I can turn off all the lights and be away from bright, shiny things. But Shaman says, yes, I agree. The flower is great. Okay, I will wear it again. In fact, I have another flower of a different color that I will wear next time. So anyway, if you guys can say a short prayer for Jason Wilson. He's been struggling a little bit. His health is inability to get Social Security disability. He's saying some very despairing things that aren't necessarily untrue. So I would like him to stay with us for as long as possible in this moral realm. That's because I'm a jealous person, and I don't want to give up my friends and those people that I consider my family. So say a prayer for him, and let his finances and everything be worked out. Let his living situation be worked out. Let his health and his health care and his income be worked out. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So anyway, I love you, my Pam fam, and I will see you all next week. I hope. Well, Saturday too. So you're very welcome, Shaman. You're very welcome for that. So, all right. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.